So here, this is work by Gustav and Mike Land, and what they were looking at was the vanishing ball illusion. So this is a well-known magical illusion. And what you will see here, well, let's see whether we experience or not. It may not work on the video so well. Right, okay. So what you saw there was the ball being thrown twice, and then it being thrown up into the air and disappearing. And typically what people experience when they watch this is that they say that they see the ball rising out of the hand and disappearing somewhere in midair. But of course, this isn't what happens. Okay? If we watch this again, what you'll notice is that on that third time that he goes to throw the ball, it never leaves the hand. And at this point here, it's still in his hand. Okay. Yet people perceive that ball flying into the air and vanishing in midair. Why is that the case? So we tried, Kuhn and Land were interested in looking at this, whether we could reveal anything about this from understanding how people watch the performance. So again, this is using an eye tracker to look at how people watch the performance, and I'll talk you through this. So we're looking here, the blue bars indicate how many people are looking at each of these three different regions. The magician's hand, his face, and above his head where the ball is going to be at its peak. Okay. And what you can see is there's a systematic pattern throughout this video. And I'll take you through it step by step. So at first, before he does anything, people start watching his face. Now as soon as he starts to move his hand, people move their eyes down to the ball in his hand. And they keep their eyes on that whilst the hand is being brought up. Now at the point that the ball is released from the hand, they don't watch the ball, they move their eyes up to his face again. And they keep their eyes on his face as the ball rises, and they don't look at the ball again until he does, and it's at the top of its flight here. Then as the ball starts to drop again, they look straight back down to the hand where it's going to be caught. Okay? And they do this on both of the first throws that happen. But what happens on this third fake throw? Well, what we see here is that at first things start off rather similar. We see that at first people are looking at the ball in his hand as he brings it up. At the point where the ball should have been released and lifted into the air, then we see people moving up to his eyes and looking at his face again. But now, at the point where the magician looks into the empty space, and you would normally expect people to look up there as well, they don't. This time, they remain looking at his face. And this is weird in a way, because what it seems to suggest is that somehow the brain is experiencing this illusion. We are experiencing this illusion. And yet the eyes aren't fooled by this. Okay? Because the eyes aren't looking up to the empty space. This doesn't answer the question of why we experience the illusion, but it does tell us something about the difference between how the eyes experience cognitive illusions or don't, and how the brain does. One other thing you'll notice in this performance is that, again, the magician is using very strong cues based on where he's looking. So in both the real throws and this fake throw, he does a very deliberate look into the space where the ball should be. So they were interested in knowing whether that is important, again, for the way that people experience this illusion. So, here we go. Again, two versions of the same performance, in which the only difference, hopefully, is that in one case, Gustav will look up to where the ball should be, and in the other case, he'll stay looking at his hand that hasn't released the ball. Right, okay. So, what happens to people's experience of this illusion? Well, in this case, the normal case, most people experience the illusion. 68% of people watching this video, this works much better live than it does on the video, by the way. This is why only 68% experience this. But still, the vast majority explain what has happened as the ball having risen into the air and then vanished somewhere up here. When people try and explain this when they're watching the video, actually, the most common thing people say is that someone was obviously catching it just above the frame of the video, and they're convinced that that's what's happened. In this second case, though, when the magician doesn't look up into space, only 36% of people experience that perception of the ball rising into the air. And now most people are able to say, well, he just didn't throw it. Okay, so clearly what the magician is looking at, again, is central to the success of this performance. So what can we understand from looking at this vanishing ball illusion? Well, one of the things we can say is that expectation seems to be really important. And why it's important here is because when people take a ball in their hand and do this, the expectation has to be that they're throwing the ball into the air. He's even built up that expectation by doing it twice already. Incidentally, just doing it the first time with a fake throw without setting up those two real throws in the first place makes the performance far less successful. In fact, not successful. So clearly it's about expectations of what should happen as the hand reaches this point. We also see this intriguing point that it may be the case that these illusions can affect the brain, and the brain can experience these illusions without necessarily being captured by the eyes. So there's some dissociation here between the effect of illusions on the eyes and the brain. And we also see another point here about the importance of where other people are looking. It's not just about controlling where we look, it's actually about controlling the experience that we have of our surroundings. What we believe that we see is so heavily influenced by where someone else looks. So it's time to start to bring these things together and try and think about how we can tie magic and science together to work for us. Well, certainly we can see that by studying the principles that are being used in these two very small types of magic that I've talked about today, we can see that they begin to give us lots of insights into the normal functioning of the brain and the way that we behave. In particular, we've seen how these can tell us about attention, about our awareness, and about the importance of expectation in what we see. What's kind of interesting and vaguely frustrating is that these things that I'm talking about today are things that psychologists are only just beginning to learn about. But clearly, some people in this room have known about this for a lot longer than we have, because these principles have been used in magic for centuries. But of course, what I've talked about today in terms of misdirection and illusion are only a very small part of what really makes up magic. Okay? And there are many other methods and techniques of magic that we don't know about as scientists yet, and these remain a mystery.